Perfect. I think this is the cue for us to start today. So good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's session of the Artificial Intelligence Forum for Small Island Digital States, AI for Cities 2.0. My name is Enrique Crespo, and I am honored to serve as your moderator for this important conversation. Over the past two sessions, we have explored the foundations for AI adoption in small island developing states, from building enabling ecosystems to strengthening governance frameworks. Today, we turn our focus on one of the most tangible and impactful areas where AI can make a real difference in people's lives, the transformations of e-services. Our session today, titled AI for e-services or e-services for AI, will invite us to think critically about the two-way relationship between digital public services and AI. On the one hand, AI can enhance the efficiency, responsiveness, and personalization of government services. And on the other hand, strong citizen-centered services provide the essential building blocks, the platforms, datasets, and governance models that enable sustainable AI innovation. Importantly, today's conversation will also explore how these technologies can be tailored to the Caribbean context, particularly to support urgent needs such as disaster risk reduction and more inclusive, resilient service delivery. This forum is the result of a strong collaboration among key partners, and we would like to acknowledge the critical support of CARICOM, the United Nations Development Programme, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, OECS, the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, CTU, UNESCO, CAF, and CARICOM. Their leadership and commitment to building responsible digital futures for small island states has been instrumental in making these dialogues possible. And we are very fortunate today to have a distinguished panel with us, leaders who bring deep expertise in digital transformation, public sector innovation, AI ethics, and policy development. Their insights will help us reflect not just on how cities can adopt AI, but how they can do so in ways that are equitable, sustainable, and centered on human development. Let me now introduce our panelists for this first part of the session. I will do our second panelist when it's time for her intervention at the second time. And I also want to make an announcement. I know that per the agenda, today we were meant to have Mr. Kevin Cunnington as the first panelist today. However, due to an unfortunate change of agenda, he cannot join us today. But we are very well accompanied today by Richard Johnston. Richard Johnston is the executive editor of the Global Government Forum, where he oversees content strategy across digital policy, research, reports, and events. A seasoned public policy journalist, Richard's work has appeared in major outlets such as the Financial Times and BBC Radio 4, providing critical analysis and insights for public servants worldwide. His perspectives will help us frame today's discussion with the evolving landscape of global public sector innovation. Dear Richard, the floor is yours, and I know you want to introduce us, of course, to Jack, that will be co-leading this session with you as well. Thank you so much for being with us today this morning.
Great. Thank you, Enrique, and hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining. It's very exciting for Jack and I to be part of this conversation. Very much looking forward to the session. Yeah, just to add to what Enrique said there, yes, to pass on apologies on behalf of Kevin Cunnington, who you mentioned was originally down to speak on this slot, but was unfortunately unable to join us. So I'm joined by my colleague Jack Aldane today, and Kevin has said he'd be keen to join a session in the future to share his insights. But Jack and I are going to present some insights today on the Global Government Forum's work on AI. We're going to speak about how Global Government Forum helped the government of Barbados understand the potential for AI, the opportunities and barriers to using AI in government, how governments around the world are using AI to improve both citizen-facing services and government systems, and how kind of some of the things that we at GGF can do to help governments share AI insights more broadly. So sorry, I've got the slides in the wrong order. So I'm Richard Johnston, just to reintroduce, reiterate that introduction. I oversee Global Government Forum's content across our digital publishing, research, and online events. GGF is a company that is focused on bringing together public servants from around the world. So panels like this are kind of really key. Participating in panels like this is really key to the work that GGF does. We want to connect public servants in different countries to address their common challenges and share best practice. And we do that through our events and through our editorial content. And our annual events program includes a Small Island Nations Digital Summit, which will return to Barbados in the fall. So yeah, this conversation is really excellent for the work of GGF, and hopefully we can contribute some information on how governments are using AI. Jack, I'll let you introduce yourself. Sorry.
Thank you, Richard, and hello, everyone. Yes, as Enrique and Richard say, I am the senior content producer at Global Government Forum and also editor of the AI Monitor newsletter, which I'll say a little bit about in more depth later on. But for now, it's good to be a participant in here, and thank you very much for allowing me to join.
Great, thanks, Jack. So yes, first thing we want to highlight is some of the work that GGF has done with governments around the world on understanding how to use AI. Last summer, Global Government Forum hosted a visit from senior figures of Barbados, including Donna Cadogan, the head of the public service, to exchange ideas with the UK government. It was a 2-day visit. It looked at how the government of Barbados could learn from the UK government's digital service in how it was developing AI tools. And there were a number of points from that study, I think, that we would like to touch on in this as part of the theme of this session. One is to take the session title that was mentioned in the introduction, AI for e-services, or e-services for AI, that the UK's government digital service had developed a chatbot that was for the UK government website, that was all about making the e-services, the services on the government website, more accessible. The UK government website is thousands and thousands of pages, but that it was decided that developing a chatbot was a way to help that become more accessible to citizens, taking all that information, putting it into a chatbot.
Richard, sorry to interrupt you, just to ask if you were meant to be sharing some slides, because I think we were just introducing them, but if you were meant to, we're not seeing them. Just in case.
Apologies. Sorry, it was because I
Yes.
went on mute when I was apologies. Can you see those now?
Yes, if you can just put them in the presentation mode, because right now we can see the whole, like PowerPoint software there. Perfect. Now we're seeing the slides full screen. Thank you so much, Richard.
Apologies.
No worries.
So yes, the UK government had developed this chatbot, and that was part of the tour was the senior leaders from Barbados joining with government leaders in the UK to discuss how they had done that. And there's some interesting lessons, I think, that flow from that. One is that the chatbot is a kind of experimental product. And we found this with other governments around the world as well. They are developing these chatbots, but they are not 100% accurate. I think the UK government has accuracy in its chatbot of north of 80%, but there is real worry in governments around the world that if they publish something that isn't 100% accurate with the government logo on it, that people might not do the kind of checking and validation that you need to do if you use AI chatbots. So that was kind of one lesson, was that they're not 100% certain that these systems work yet, and that governments that are using them are being very cautious in trying to explain that to their citizens. Another key lesson is that obviously these chatbots are powered by the information that is already on government websites. And often, if there's a big announcement in government, and people on this call will know this better than me, it can be days until the websites themselves are updated with the correct information. So what the UK government mentioned in this tour and have kind of reiterated to us subsequently is that they're working to get the communication bit of policy announcements higher up the sign-off chain, as it were, higher up the chain of command, so that when a policy goes live, the website is updated that day, and that then the chatbot is updated that day. So if a policy is being announced, the chatbot is able to answer questions on it. And it's those kind of elements, that integration between the policy announcements, the policy delivery, that are really important to improving that reliability of the chatbot and being able to promote it to the public. In the UK, the chatbot has been launched in beta and it's being used for kind of business transactions rather than consumer-facing transactions. But there's hope to expand that at pace. But that's, again, that's a sign of the caution that they're not allowing this chatbot to be used yet for kind of benefits and welfare decisions. It's for kind of starting a business type transactions. Another key point that came out of the study tour that Barbados was part of was the importance of meta tagging, which again leads to that kind of website updating element. When website pages are updated in government, often the meta tags, the things that search engines use to profile, to kind of rank them and order them, weren't being updated at the same time. And that is a task that government has been able to automate and use AI for. So there was a once a year, this is information from Kevin that's really useful. Once a year was previously how frequently the meta tags, the tags associated with government web pages for search engines, were being updated. Now, thanks to AI, they're being updated every day. And that's making government information, the kind of information about the services, much more up to date and easy for people to find using services like Google. A further point that was highlighted in the study tour was the use of sentiment analysis, and again, the role in AI in this. The UK government website, as I'm sure many other government websites do too, asks users if they've found what they wanted when they visited the website. They get about 2,000 responses a day, and now those responses are being analysed by AI to provide insight on what e-services are working well and which ones aren't, and allowing government action to focus on fixing those. Kevin wanted to flag that this is a real opportunity, and he, from his experience, highlighted that he's aware that the Bridgetown port in Barbados is already using sentiment analysis like this, and that AI could be used to unlock future insights. And lastly, the tour covered some of the tools that have been developed in the UK government to help civil servants themselves use AI technology. The package is now being called Humphrey, after the civil servant in the TV comedy Yes Minister or Yes Prime Minister, if that rings a bell with anybody. But it's a suite of tools that are kind of government approved AI tools, not using ChatGPT, which some government departments I know around the world have advised civil servants not to use. These are government approved tools that allow for, in the case of one's tools called Redbox, for some summation of policy documents, even those that are classified as official sensitive, so not for wider publication. It can provide that summation. There's also a tool called Minute, which is a transcription and meeting summation service, and a tool called Consult, which is using AI and data science techniques to extract patterns and themes from consultation responses into government policy and turning them into dashboards for policymakers. The UK is not, those tools aren't available to all civil servants, but they're being rolled out. But it's just an example that was part of the tour of where the potential is and how government is looking to deploy it. The next thing I want to touch on is the findings from a big research report that GGF conducted with UK civil servants on the roadmap to deploying AI more widely, taking those tools like the kind I was mentioning on the last slide and looking to deploy them at scale and use them to drive better services for citizens. The report interviewed 10 leaders in the UK government to help understand how ready the government is to embrace AI and make the most of its potential. And it identified 6 key points for how governments can make the most of AI. And as I said, these were from UK government interviews, but I think from our work with other governments, we'd say these are kind of broadly applicable. So you can see them there. I'll just run them down quickly. Agree a vision to develop services. So have a clear vision on how you want to use it as a government. Design competitions to identify and scale up promising innovations. So often we find that use cases are known on the front line, but perhaps not often always known by the people who are involved in government. So design competitions to help unite those two groups and come up with surface the ideas that could work. Develop a whole of government plan to unify the work of individual organisations. That's something we've found needs to happen in a lot of governments, that different parts of government are doing different things, but also different parts of government are often doing the same thing, and they didn't know that their peers were developing a piece of software that, for example, can help automate ministerial correspondence or can help automate searching for parliamentary records. So there's a need to coordinate better to make sure that there's not repetition of effort and to allow more more experiments to be undertaken. Create formal and informal networks of collaboration. So again, connecting the people together who are working in technology in government to share that best practice and to connect them with people delivering the services. Create an AI hub that is fully accountable to ministers and top officials. We find that leadership is very important to a lot of government transformation. It comes up in a lot of our studies. So it's creating that central leadership that can drive action across governments is important, and making that accountable to the ministers to drive practice. And creating dedicated AI civil service roles. Again, governments are at different stages on this, whether they have AI practitioners as part of their kind of civil service skill mix, but that we identified a need for kind of dedicated civil servants with AI competencies, and hopefully they can help drive their expertise across the whole of the departments that they are part of. So yeah, as I said, these are building blocks that I think we have identified as being consistent around, and one that kind of also comes up in a lot of our conversations is around data sharing. Data sharing is something that governments have often struggled with, but it's particularly important in helping make AI work. By connecting data across government, AI tools can reach their kind of full potential and focus on unifying services for the user, so that if they have a life event like the birth of a child, or they want to register a business, an AI tool can help join all the bits of that service together. But as one interviewee put it to us, if government wants to be serious about machine learning tools and frameworks to help it become more productive and efficient, it really has to solve its data problems. Just limping along is no longer an option. And that's where we find a lot of governments are in needing to drive that data sharing, needing to make sure that the standards are the same, that the understanding is higher across departments on how data can be used, both to kind of drive improved policy and to provide that unified service proposal to citizens. Again, that will take time to build, but right now the data sharing kind of doesn't allow for it. And yeah, that's really key to unlocking a lot of the potential, and where e-services and AI can really work hand in hand. I'm now just going to pass over to Jack, who's going to run through some of the findings we have from our events program in terms of how governments around the world are telling us that they are using AI.
Thank you, Richard. So, as Richard was saying, ways in which governments currently around the world are using AI. When we've spoken to governments at our events and asked them to describe the ways in which AI is most relevant to their organization as a whole and also departmentally, number one is the ability of AI to increase efficiency and automation. It's seen as a tool to make government more efficient and productive by automating tasks and processes. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the kinds of tasks and processes that AI has proven very good at automating in a moment. But this can include automating decision making. But we need to look at what kind of decision making that really pertains to. We've spoken already in Richard's presentation about tools like Redbox and Humphrey that are more there to sort of clarify the grounds on which decisions can be made. If you think about ministerial documents being created so that there is more time for decision making in the process of those documents being made, and then decisions that are made as a result of being able to look at those documents without time having been invested in creating them from scratch or manually, all through a human in the loop. So efficiency and automation, one of the key examples that we've heard about pertains to the NHS in the UK. A few years ago, we heard the head of NHS England talk about the potential for automated systems to take over what is currently the intranet, the proprietary system for administrative tasks in the NHS, to replace that with a system that can input all the information that nurses and some doctors are having to input manually, so that those doctors and nurses are able to deliver care and deliver the service in person to their patients more fully and consistently. And this is one of those key areas where you sort of see the ability of AI to automate processes can have such an effect on the end user of a service like a healthcare service, when the people who are there to provide that care aren't caught up with administrative tasks. So every time a nurse has performed a task, they normally would have to log it in a system. If that system of logging can happen automatically, then it makes it much easier for that nurse to simply get on with the job that he or she has. There's also data analysis and insights. AI has been shown to be very effective at helping government get better at gathering and analyzing large amounts of procurement data to improve decision making. It can also be used for sentiment and customer contact analysis, as we've spoken about in previous segments of Richard's talk. When it comes to analyzing those large amounts of data too, it's important to be able to feed in the good quality data to get the best outputs. And that's something that comes back time and time again with AI, is that you're only going to get as good an AI administrator as you are going to feed in the best kind of data that you have to begin with. Service delivery, of course, is one of the main goals of all of this. AI has the potential to improve service delivery by summarizing complex information for judges. Again, we've spoken about those tools in the UK government, like Humphrey, like Redbox, that are already proving quite good at this. Potentially for diagnostics as well. Again, going back to the NHS, we've spoken about administrative processes that nurses and doctors have to make as they go. But for those key decision-making processes that we spoke about in the first bullet point, AI that could be used for diagnostics could be really, really revolutionary. And now that's something that there are good examples for. Healthcare examples would include something that was mentioned by the Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer, when he announced the UK AI Action Plan at the start of the year. He spoke about the example, a real life example of a woman who had suffered a stroke, had been rushed to a hospital. And as anybody who has either read about it or has experienced this, when somebody does suffer a stroke, it's a race against time. He described, Keir Starmer, the process by which an AI tool was used to identify the clot in less than 3 minutes and was able to alleviate the clot before the patient's condition worsened. And this is just another example of how that combination of diagnostics and decision making with AI works to great advantage. So let's have a look at, is there anything else on this slide there? I can't see the slide at the moment.
We're not seeing the slide deck right now, dear Jack. We're seeing you on a speaker mode right now.
That's okay. I'd just like to wrap up, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you can see there, internal operations, citizen engagement, and combating environmental issues. These are also included in this. And citizen engagement is really important. The last thing I'll say on this is that when we have these conversations, how governments are using AI is, of course, an important thing to be looking at and analyzing and seeing what progress they're making. But the other thing also to be talking about always is how do you get buy-in from the citizen? How do you build public trust, given that mistrust around public institutions is so rife at the moment? So we're constantly looking at how it is that governments are telling a compelling and assuring story around AI in order to get that buy-in from the public. I'll leave it there for now, though. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard, Jack. We already have some noise on questions and answers, so if you can start having on the chat and the Q&A feature of Zoom. We already have a couple of questions there for you to engage, but right now we're going to be jumping on the Mentimeter. So, dear Jabari, dear Karen, if we want to jump into the Mentimeter before we go to our second part of the session, into the Q&A, that is great. So you have the link now for all the participants here. You have the link to the Mentimeter on the chat of Zoom. And dear Karen, I think you can share the screen with the Mentimeter. That would be great so that we can have the results in real time in the screen for Richard and Jack to analyze while it's moving. So everybody that's participating here, if you can go to the Mentimeter link and start giving you your thoughts. The first question there is, what are the most important things for government to get right for AI? And it's important that we have this deep dive with all of you about your reflections. What are the most important things for government to get right for AI? Dear Karen, thank you so much. Yes, the screen is being shared right now. So we already have one response: the legal framework that will ensure that human rights, including privacy or health, policy and guidelines for use. Let's keep the responses incoming. We're going to give it a couple of minutes. Finances, of course, having resources to implement the AI is critical as ever, specifically in Latin America and the Caribbean. Ethic and policy guidance. Legal framework, effective, meaningful, inclusion and adoption, data protection. Framework for use, policy and legislative governance. Sorry for that. Karen, can you move it a little bit lower because the answers keep stacking down to the low? Policy guidance, privacy and protection, data security. So we have a couple of answers there for you, Richard and Jack. Now that we were discussing about how the government is using, they're saying not potentially, but using as of now in the UK AI. Now that you're seeing some of the reflections of the participants on what are the important things for government to get right for AI. For me, it strikes me that people are always thinking about legislation, of course, because we need to think about privacy, about human rights on the deployment of the systems. And when you were saying, Richard and Jack, interoperability, sharing data, the first thought that came to mind is because at UNDP and CAP and all the, I would say, partners that are part of this forum, we promote digital public infrastructure as a way to promote interoperability and to make systems more efficient, of course. But one of the things that is always coming to mind is that if that happens, then government becomes kind of this big brother, very Orwellian system that has access to all the data. And if everything is interconnected, basically they have all the information of everyone, from health to education, to social security. So at the downside of that, seeing that our participants are discussing a lot about regulation, how are you seeing that as one of the key, I would say, high marks to get AI right in the UK? And how do you reflect on these thoughts that our participants have on what are the most important things for government to get right for AI?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think trust, Jack touched on it there. Trust is really important, and governments being clear with their citizens and with their civil servants, their public servants, about how they are using AI, where it is being used, and how is is vital, because you can only build that trust um, with transparency and with people understanding it. There's been studies that show that um, public servants themselves are not uh, always trusting of the output of AI systems if it was instructing them, like if it did an analysis of kind of at-risk cases, that if public servants aren't confident in the outcomes from that process, then they won't act on it. And if there are benefits to be gained, but in how government works from using AI, then it needs to have that the confidence of both the civil servants and the public itself. The two things that I know Kevin wanted to flag in this section were data, and I think you've touched on that, Enrique, the importance of data in providing the underpinning for AI and keeping that up to date, and providing that the join up to potentially create those better services with the guardrails in it that as you state about how governments can control their data and building that trust. I always add at this point as an aside that the citizens around the world seem much happier to share their data with multinational organizations and like Facebook and big social media networks than they are with their own governments. And I appreciate there can be many reasons for that, but it often comes up in our global government forum event conversations that there is an anomaly there, that the governments are always slightly struggling, swimming against the tide to get the trust of citizens to share their data when they would share it widely.
With the private
Organizing.
sector, and that the private sector doesn't necessarily share the data with the government as well. I saw recently in the UK there was this whole thing about the government basically having this dispute with Meta about how they could access the data of private citizens. And that's a whole different conversation. I don't want to stay in the loop there because I have a question that I think is at the intersection of some of the answers that our participants are providing. Specifically here, I'm seeing general digital literacy. And at the intercross with civil servants, one of our participants at TV is actually asking that why some governments are telling, and not only governments, I would say this is something that happens in other institutions as well, not to use certain AI systems. For example, and I want to call it by name because the question is asked by name. It says, for example, not use ChatGPT at work because it might, you might end up providing sensible information to a system and you don't know where the data is going. What are your thoughts on that, Richard and Jack? Of course, if you want to jump in on this as well, because of course, we know we have to, I would say, kind of be respectful of the guidelines that we are given out of workplaces. But I think it's the same thing as if somebody 10 years ago said, don't use Google, like you're at work, don't use Google. And at the same time, it's like, and I like this question of Atiba because it's provoking. So what are our 2 cents on how do we balance the wide use of AI systems, specifically generative AI at work, whether we have or not specific guidelines on which systems to use at our offices as civil servants, whether we are international or local civil servants. Richard, Jack.
Yeah. So this question of how free civil servants should feel to use ChatGPT and the distinction between different types of large language model. It's an interesting one, isn't it? But it's I think the difference in the analogy you used there, Enrique, between using Google for work and using a large language model or any kind of generative AI is that though a search engine would appear to be generative, and again one that scrapes information that is pre-existing, the only difference is that it doesn't convert it into something that purports to be an original piece of work. It's merely the raw material with which for then the person who's using that search engine to put something together to collate a piece of work. So I think that with ChatGPT, the fear is always that information that is both fed out may be unreliable, but also importantly, information that a civil servant could feed in could be dangerous. People do not like the idea of government officials using anything that even approaches personal data or sensitive information and then giving it to a large language model, which is only then going to metabolize it and use it without anything being able to, be retrieved or reversed. So that's a lot of where that anxiety comes from. But to go back to our original point about the difference between consumer kind of joy at being able to engage with private sector provided platforms versus government services. Somebody once said in a podcast we produced that people tend only to engage with government services when there's a personal cost to them not doing it, i.e., they could get in trouble, whether it's through a tax return or through registering a business. Government services come with a sort of a heavy kind of tone and implication. Whereas the reason why people are so eager to give their data to private companies is because private companies purport to want us to have fun with the stuff that they provide, and government doesn't. Government should perhaps try to imitate the fun, gamesome nature of kind of private sector products, but I think the underlying tone is that people will always know that government is not there for them to have fun with. It's there to impose upon them, demands that they may suffer consequences from if they don't engage. So that's kind of I think it's an interesting psychological question why people are like this, but I think I think we can all safely say we fall into this category.
Thank you so much for that reflection, dear Jack. And before moving on, because we have to go to a second part of our session, be mindful of our time and, of course, of our dear Cam, Laurie, who is waiting for the second part to come through. As a wrap up, and I just wanted to ask Jack and Richard, you're going to find some questions both in the chat and in the Q&A. If you want to type something down, or maybe at the end of the session, just address them, that would be great as well. So we're moving forward to our second part of the session, and I wanted to give a warm welcome to our dear Cam Lauren Lubin. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. If not, just forgive me. I'm a Spanish-speaking language, so doing it in English is already tricky. So dear Cam, thank you so much for being with us today. Cam is the co-founder of Human Tech Futures and the AI Global South Summit Foundation, with leadership experience at Siemens, BlackBerry, and Autodesk, and over 2 decades of expertise spanning corporate innovation and academic research. Cam has been a pioneer in promoting humanity-centered approaches to digital transformation. Her current research in computational rhetoric in AI-powered systems, particularly concerning their impacts on marginalized communities. We'll round today's discussion in an essential ethical and, above everything, inclusive perspective. Dear Cam, it's a true pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your knowledge with us in this morning.
Enrique, thank you so much for this gracious introduction. And I also want to acknowledge, Jabari, Kellyanne, Karen, and all of the pre-work. There's nothing like having organizers who help us create that rapport, because, we're all doing this for the first time here in front of a screen. And so thank you so much for that. I'm going to share my screen. And while I'm doing that, I want to say, Richard and Jack, your presentation really anticipated mine in many ways. In many ways, it is a kind of a zoom in of the presentation that I will give. Let me just make sure I pull this up correctly. The presentation that I will give. Are you seeing my screen?
Right now, we're still waiting for, now we see perfect.
Perfect. And I don't know where my face has gone to, but I assume I'm somewhere on your screen. So thank you so much. Yes. So, and I'm also very thrilled to see, as I'm looking at the admission screen for people in waiting rooms coming in, there's a large subset of people who had attended the Global South Summit in St. Lucia last year. So I'll talk a little bit about this as well, too, before I jump into the conversation, which I will frame as a kind of a macro conversation to the more zoomed in experiential conversation that Richard and Jack has just presented. So as Enrique said, my name is Cam Lauren Lubin. I'm originally from the island of St. Lucia. I was born there. However, I live in Canada. I've lived here for 40 years, but with very deep roots in St. Lucia. And for those of you who, of course, know me personally, these roots are quite deep in many spheres. Nonetheless, I co-founded the AI Global South Summit organization last year. For me, it was a critical decision to do that. I actually quit my job to do that, along with Dr. Rigobert, who I do believe was presenting earlier on, maybe I think in February or March, I'm not quite certain. And we decided when we attended the Caribbean Studies Association conference that we needed to do something. I was just coming off the tail end of being at a conference called, it was at MIT, and I was on the panel with some folks from the CIA, and we were talking about, on this panel, how do we govern AI? And it occurred to me that I was in a global North country, at a global North event, talking to people who, when we had the breakout network sessions, was about, how many millions of dollars did you get for this AI app that, I don't know, did what, right? And so the conversation circled in that sphere. And so that was back in spring of last year. So when I went to St. Lucia for the CSA, we were having this very same conversation, and we thought, well, can we actually host an event for Creole Month in October if we begin planning now? And for me, it was something that really was a calling of putting aside what I was doing in the corporate space, of course, and academic space to just do this. And so I'm also the co-founder of a company here in Canada called Human Tech Futures. For me, these are two organizations or initiatives that are really one and the same. One for me is a place where we can, have that conversation in a not-for-profit frame, and as well to Human Tech Futures, it's really a follow through on my own academic scholarly work in AI and computational rhetoric. And so there's a lot of conversations that we can have, but I'd like to move forward to be mindful of the time and to provide some extra time for conversation. So let me just move forward, if I may. I'm not quite sure I'm not moving forward. Let me just make sure I have the right presentation.
Yes, because it's not moving forward. Just check that.
Okay, I think I'm going to do a quick stop share and make sure that I have the right presentation. Give me a second. Let's do that. Share. Okay. I see what has happened. Okay. Let me know that you can see.
Just 1 second, it's loading. It should be working. It's working now. You can just set it to presentation mode. There can now it's the full presentation as per what it is.
Yeah, okay, you can see that.
Yes.
So I also want to frame this as a conversation that is not in isolation of many other conversations that we're having in the Global South, particularly the Caribbean. And the AI Global South Summit was just one of a series of events of similar scope that had taken place. I think there was one in Antigua. There was something in Trinidad. I think there might even be something in Jamaica as well happening. But what I want to bring to bear is that given that some of a subset of the presenters at the AI Global South Summit are also presenters here, I want to drag us back to focus and to really frame this as a continued conversation that has many threads. And to that end, I think it is a conversation that should always acknowledge what has transpired. So from the perspective of AI, when we think about AI, we have a shared understanding as a Global South collective, particularly in the Caribbean, that it needs to be a homegrown solution. And though we have, and we have to at some points leverage things done in, using foreign machine learned models, it has to be a homegrown innovation. And it also has to share some digital foundations. And I mentioned this here because recalling last October being in St. Lucia and talking about how, in the Caribbean, we have this aversion to digitizing things. And I think it was His Excellency Dr. Didicus Jules who raised the example where he had been trying to digitize a lot of the folk documents. And there was a lot of pushback on that. The idea that we have all of this amazing, rich heritage that sits in somebody's drawer somewhere was something that he'd given thought to, but the inability to actually digitize that itself was foundationally a problem. And I also want to take this conversation to another direction when I talk about digitization foundations, is that we have to have digitized data before we even think about what we built on top, i.e. leveraging AI power. And remembering that, of course, AI is not the icing, it's just the icing on top. It is not the thing, right? And I think one of the other presenters mentioned that. To the earlier presentation, we also need to think about, when we think about AI, we cannot get overwhelmed with the idea that oh my gosh, there is this thing called AI and we're behind. We really need to start small and to grow from there. And so we do need to start with piloting concepts of what it means to be running something with AI power. Now, I'm not going to get into what AI is at this point. I know an earlier presenter talked about that, but AI has many faces. Of course, many of us think immediately of chatbots, etc., but it's a little bit more involved than that. We also need to build on our local talent because we need that as foundational to ownership of the data that we're producing. We also need to not fall into that AI panacea trap, thinking that AI is the solution for everything. And we also, just again with the AI Global South Summit, people are still thinking, oh, well, the technology that we had prior didn't work. Why should we build upon this broken tech? We need to therefore acknowledge that a lot of obstacles still linger for us in the Global South when we think about building data systems upon data systems that are actually faulty foundationally. We also need to use we use we need to develop policy partnerships and joint initiatives to gain momentum. I think Richard and Jack have alluded to some of the use cases where they've done that, specifically with the UK and Barbados. But most of all, we also need to ensure that the things that we're solving for are done so in the context of the Caribbean. And I'll talk about that later as we think about Caribbean economies framed in that color frame and what that means for us at the very concrete level. We need to keep it simple. And foundationally, we need to earn trust of citizens and invest in AI skills and literacy. People don't know what the thing is. How can they trust it? And this brings to mind some of the conversations that we had. I think it was with Export St. Lucia, who was one of the presentation tables at the AI Global South Summit, is that we need to be able to earn the trust of citizens, and not just citizens, but the stakeholders, whether it is the person trying to sell coal pots to the rest of the world from St. Lucia who needs, who's part of that ecosystem, who needs myriad AI support systems to enable them to actually compete on a global market. So all of that comes to bear when I think about, hopefully, us on this call. This is the shared foundation and shared understanding that we have for having this conversation as we move forward. So I won't spend too much on that, but we know already that AI is a very powerful transformational tool. For me, I try not to get overwhelmed by AI and think about it as just another technological posture that where technology is talking, data systems are talking to other data systems to enable really amazing stuff. Things like augmenting some of our human abilities and expertise. I think Richard mentioned that earlier. It can enable hyper-personalization, proactive citizenship interaction instead of a one-size-fits-all. It can help us tackle scale and complexity because when we have big data, we can see different things at different scales, right? We can zoom in the aperture, we could zoom it out to be able to understand really the kinds of decisions that we need to make to enable continuous learning and improvement. And I also want to say here that we cannot look to AI as that thing that we use to power the systems that we have and leave it alone, right? Because when we think about it, it is artificial in a sense, and we also need to be cognizant of the fact that AI is building on data. And time moves on, data becomes stale, i.e. sometimes data swamps in that case. So I will spend a minute here just talking about some of the challenges, and some of these also come from the AI Global South Summit that different presenters presented in terms of, the things that are not working. And I want to also pivot from that energy. So of course, we're very well aware that we have spotty internet connectivity and power systems struggles throughout the Caribbean. It's just something we've always had. Ever since I was a little girl, I went back again to St. Lucia just recently, twice last year, in fact, and we still are plagued with these challenges. I also want to make a note to myself, do not call them problems, they're just challenges, right? We also do not have enough good data to start with. Again, just recalling, the presentation that His Excellency gave last year of the OECS, because Dr. Jules. We're a small island. We have we sometimes a little bit more conservative in our embracement of technology, right? And so that goes hand in hand with not having necessarily the foundational data to do the things we would like to do. And we also have poor management. We have with that as well, so this lack of trust in the data structures as well too. We need to acknowledge we have too little research and skill set, right? And just by mere virtue of, having Richard and Jack here, this is great that we have them as assets to leverage their skills to bring these as well to bear on Caribbean context. But we also need to make the investment in our own local research and skill set to help create the momentum we need to follow. We have few rules and guidelines. Again, we alluded to that, right? Data governance, privacy, these are all things that go in hand when we think about, people's data just hanging about the place, and we see what's happening, especially in the US right now. And of course, we have the never-ending constant climate and budgetary pressures. It is what it is, right? So I want to zone in and sort of pivot from then, just use this opportunity to talk about the opportunities themselves that we have that we can build from. So the first things first is that we need to use our differences as our strength, treating each island like its own lab and trying out ideas that we can then propagate throughout. And I learned this particular skill when I worked at Siemens. I was always struck by how Siemens as a company just did so much and so fast. And this was, in essence, the model that they had, was that each unit specialized in something. And once that was actually optimized, we propagated that across the company around the world. And so for me, when I think about the Caribbean islands specifically, and I'll say as well to Latin America, we need to think about that, right? We move faster together. We also need to make some investment in skipping on the old tech and moving towards what gets us there, and considering that we need to also make concessions and consideration for sustainable approaches to doing that, right? And how do we actually, at the same time, ensure that the data that we're putting into the system is actually clean? Because a lot of the legacy data is actually not clean data. And so we need to acknowledge that. We also need to think about how we create shared data pools, how we set up regional AI hubs. These are all things that we need to do. And we've alluded to that in the earlier presentation. How do we actually speak to each other? Governments do not necessarily have a legacy or a history of actually doing things together. Think about it. The election cycle is about 4 to 5 years for most countries. By the time when government comes in, they start from scratch. They're not talking to that government, or this is not their party. I think this is something that I don't work in government, but this is something definitely that we need to bypass. And this again brings to frame why organizations like the UNDP, UNESCO are so vital, because they are meant to be apolitical structures in that regard and can help us usher in that way of thinking, right? And this is something I actually took from the UNDP UNESCO sites, is that we need to build weatherproof low-power systems that can enable the foundations and the infrastructure that we need to run AI-powered systems. We also need to test our policies together, running multi-island pilots for AI rules and ethics, so we understand how our data as people, as citizens, are going to be protected, not just locally, but as we think about data sharing practices across the Caribbean, across SIDS, we need to think about, if I send my data to Jamaica, or if my data is used to optimize something in Trinidad, what does that mean for me as a citizen, right? And so these are the things that all come together to actually build trust. And the question that was raised earlier really made me smile, about why we give our data more easily to companies like Meta versus the government. And for me, a lot of it has to be the progressive asking of the data. I recall when I left Facebook in 2009, I had seen Facebook up to this point as a place where I shared pictures, and that was it. And that was about the time when they said, "Oh, what high school did you go to?" And I thought, "Oh, why do you want to know that?" And so this is something that we have to think about, not only as, government is utility, this is more fun, but there is a method to how Meta and other social media companies have done that, because we never really know what their next move is going to be. And so the data that they're collecting is progressive, right? Until they have everything about you. And we need to also aim at big impact areas, right? So I'll talk about this as we talk about orange, blue, green economies, etc., and what that means for actually thinking about our Caribbean context, small island nation context. So Jabari, Kellyanne, and Karen, I was thinking about, how do I hop into this conversation in 20 minutes? Because this is a big conversation. We're not going to solve anything here in 20 minutes, but I kept on thinking about the AI Global South Summit and how the theme was mostly around orange economy and i.e. the creative industries and how we leverage AI for that, right? In gastronomy, in tourism, in what was it again? Gastronomy, tourism, and I forgot there was something else, and just general tourism, right? And so I have some examples that I will show. And so I started thinking as well too of the whole concept of technology, a place that I've worked in for, I hate to say, I may look young, but yes, 25 years. Yes, and how do we actually think about the collective meta tagging of all of the efforts we have across the Caribbean? And how can we frame them in something that already exists, i.e., this color-coded representation of our varying economies across the Caribbean, right? So we have the orange economy, the creative ones, the blue, which is the ocean and fisheries, etc., and health in that space. Green being the environmental and sustainability. Gray, of course, the gray space, as well as the silver economy as it relates to aging populations and elderly services. And so for me, this was something that really grasped my attention as I was putting together this presentation as a place where we can collectively have a common taxonomy for talking about, how do we begin this implementation at scale? So I want to say how that by celebrating what's already working, we also spark new ideas and we inspire trust to actually turbocharge future innovations across our many island communities. So let me just hop into what I mean by that. I wanted to do some work, just doing some curation of what it is that we're doing that's already working, right? And how we can use the Siemens model, I'll call it for now because I don't have a better name for it. But in St. Lucia, when we look at the orange economy, for example, these are all things, of course, taken out of the Global South Summit and some additional research. We have initiatives of the Ministry of Tourism already investing in this space where we're doing a kind, I say to my kids, it's like a Pokemon Go, right? Imagine that you're a tourist in St. Lucia and you need to know about a specific monument that you've come across walking in the city, right? How cool would it be to actually leverage data to give that rich experience to St. Lucian tourists, right? And so I call this just one of the use cases around the orange economy that should be adapted and adopted by the other Caribbean islands that enable the richness of the tourist experience in the Caribbean. So this initiative not only modernized the visitor experience, but it also created a living digital archive to preserve St. Lucia's cultural heritage for future generations. And again, I'll go to the bottom here. We have in Jamaica, this one was just really cool to me, that in 6 months trial across hospitals, they were able to build models to alert their health teams, right, of when they had a breakout like dengue fever and influenza. So these are all, again, moving away from not necessarily saying, ChatGPT is not AI, but other applications of AI-powered systems in the context of e-government services. I left the blue one because I'm going to double click into that later, but we have the case in Belize where we have AI-driven updates, which helps improve the habitat classification accuracy by 25%, right? And these are all things that while Belize is doing this should be really across the Caribbean. We share the same water, we share the same cultures and foundational cultures, right? In Barbados, this was just one example. Barbados is just, they're doing so much and they're doing so many wonderful things. So early intervention in crop losses. And so I think, I'm not quite sure how they source the data, whether or not this is, what's the word I'm looking for, whether this is pulled from people just sending these in, but they're able now to have people, send pictures of pepper leaves, for example, and flag early signs of fungal infections, right? How cool would that be if St. Lucia did that for its banana industries and other agricultural industries as well, too? And the case here in Trinidad, this was a case where AI can flag when an elderly person living alone actually might need some support. So again, this is just 5 use cases that I drew upon with some research and from the AI Global South Summit. But these are things that if, for example, we're to double click, say, into the blue economy, we have so many more stories to tell. I have some of the references at the end, so these can definitely be checked. So Belize, we have just general Caribbean as well. We have amazing stuff happening in Trinidad, again, Barbados. And so there's just all of these stories that I think we need to think about. How do we do this as a collective? How do we create systems where we can curate all of these wonderful AI stories? And to me, this is the foundation of building trust. When we have optimized it in one space and we know that it's working, this is how we roll it out. When we think about software design, at least when I was working in software, it's about that cycle of testing and iterating testing and saying, okay, this is good to go. Now we can deploy, right? So I want to leave you with this. Well, actually, I have a couple more slides. I'm lying. So how do we actually, and so you may say to me, okay, Cam, the blue stories, for example, how would that work? So this is just a proposed guidance to implementation of AI. And I've just leveraged my own background as a design research leader and how I would do this with my team. So of course, we need to start with user needs. In this case, I say citizens' needs, but this could be whoever it is, the representative groups that we're trying to support and to help. We also need to, again, framing this through my background in sustainable design, we need to design for intermittent connectivity, understanding that, we are not always online in the Caribbean. It's just the fact of being in a hurricane-prone space. We also need to pull and govern data regionally. We cannot, I think of the case, it was when I was working at BlackBerry, and I forgot who was in power. Oh, it was Obama for that matter. I think it was Obama who was just coming into power. And we were told at BlackBerry that no, the Americans will not have their data servers in Waterloo, Ontario. We need to open an office in the US because we need to have this data, American data, managed by American people, of course, with BlackBerry oversight. And so we need to think about this, right? How do we do this, knowing that the hosting of data is actually creates heat, and this is, of course, a sustainability climate challenge. I alluded to that earlier. Number 4, we need to build local skills and labs, training our people to actually do this kind of work. We also need to partner for resilient infrastructure, again, the sustainability, a climatic aspect of that, and the prototyping, testing, iterating model that many of you will be familiar with. And last but not least, embedding ethics and data sovereignty as the casing for all of that. And so for each of these steps, I've actually pulled, some of the examples from the previous page. I could not have more than 5. It would get too cluttery, but you will see that there's wonderful stories from the Cayman Islands as well, too, just general OECS. I think there was also one from St. Vincent as well, too, so that you will be familiar with because this is your work in the Coastal Communities Project. So this would be what I would recommend. How do we actually begin to implement that and to tell those stories? So zooming back up, I wanted to set my time. I'm not quite sure if it's on. Zooming back up, and we're looking at, in this case, the whole color spectrum of the varying OECS economies, again, from orange to silver. How do we actually do that at more of a macro level? And so I'll just go through these 10 points that I've sussed out for this. And so the first would, of course, be mapping the priorities that the priority sectors, right? And even within these color economies themselves will be priorities. So we have things like, the digital permits for cultural events, for example. That's something that I think I could have made use of when I was running the event for AI Global South Summit last year. Precision Acro Advisory, right? And all of these wonderful examples. So we need to be able to frame these varying categories and the sub AI-powered opportunities that they each have. We also need to assess readiness and gaps, right? So that's something that we have to do. I'm not going to read all of this because I will be sharing this presentation with the folks here that can share it out. We also need to define cross-economy objectives, right? Set clear targets. We need to have metrics for how these things are going to perform and to be able to monitor the performance of these things, right? And so in the old days, when we talked about the BlackBerry design, we did things like, the average user satisfaction of using our devices, right? So we also need to design modular resilient architectures. So core services platforms with plug-in AI models tailored by economy, right? And so I've already talked about this. I'm not going to go through this again, but you can see some examples here. Green, for example, mobile crop advisory chatbots. In the gray, not green, the silver one, voice-enabled telecare assistants. These are all examples that are just ripe for exploitation and opportunities. Number 5, we also need to establish a shared data trust. Trust is a word that you will see a lot when we talk about data. We know now how loose that data is treated, given that it also emanates from non-governmental industries where data is just something that we, throw in a sandbox and play with it, not thinking about whose data it is and who's affected by that. So we also need to pilot these representative solutions in SIDS context, right? So if we're designing something for the Caribbean context, why we're testing in Europe, for example, we need to build regional AI skilling hubs. We need to co-create a policy sandboxes. It's not just deploying it. We also need to manage it and to watch it and to help it and to improve it so that we actually begin and continue to retain the trust of the people that it's meant to serve. We need to scale proven modules regionally. I talked about that earlier. If it's working and it's deployed well somewhere, why not just copy and paste, localize, what's the word I'm looking, contextualize, etc. And we also need to monitor, learn, and iterate. So these, to me, are some of the high-level implementation frameworks that we could use when we think about how do we leapfrog forward, given what we have been given, right? We've been given geographies that have lots of challenges, and we need to make allowances for that. So I will end by echoing or re-echoing an old African proverb, is that we may go fast alone, but we can go further together. And I hope it is with that sentiment that we think about how do we begin leveraging the massive power of AI for SIDS as we think about tech futures for our SIDS citizens.
Thank you so much,
Just some
references. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Ken, for such an inspiring presentation, I would say. Dear Karen, well, we want to share the Mentimeter for the second part of the session. I just wanted to reflect that this is a perspective, and I would try to frame it as South-South cooperation, that we are positioning, and by we, I don't only mean, again, UNDP, I mean all of the allies that are on this call, because in the end, what you were discussing about the Caribbean, me coming from Latin America and Ecuador and myself, is the same reality we have. We have plenty of conditions, plenty of challenges. If we don't go together, it's going to be harder. We're still being very much isolated, and we don't have the capacities. So I agree with that on you completely. And seeing that fact that AI, from your perspective, is always an enabler. You were trying to peg AI to, I would say, sectors of the economy, whether they are traditional or more new and young, saying, how can AI unlock the power of those sectors? And I really like that thought, because in the end of the day, AI is an enabler. It's not something that exists just for the sake of existence. And that is one way of seeing it. And one final point that really struck with me again is sovereignty, because when we're discussing about it, we're saying, hey, it's important for us to be able to have control over the privacy of our data and the data of our citizens, not only in the public sector, but also in the private sector, because in the end, we really don't know what's going on when companies collect the data of citizens around the world. So going to the Mentimeter, dear Ken, we're asking these questions to the participants. What comes to mind when you think of using AI for government services in small island development states? So we see that a lot of people are thinking about data privacy and sovereignty concerns, faster service delivery, digital exclusion risks, cost savings, city empowerment, or others. What do you make out of these reflections? Again, data privacy, it seems to be top of mind when people are thinking about AI. And the second one, I would say, is empowerment of citizens. So it's kind of a duality, right? Seeing citizen empowerment and data privacy going hand in hand. What do you make out of this, dear Ken?
I think these are highly expected. When we think about trust and privacy and sovereignty, these are all foundational to the other things on top. Is that, of course, we have a task that we as citizens are hoping to do with the government, right? Whether it is to update that we've had a baby or whatever the situation is. And foundationally, it's about the trust. And so these were highly expected. I also think that AI, since it became a buzzword in in common vernacular, has been very divisive, right? Some people either like it or they hate it, but there's lots of confusion about what it is and why it is actually framed as it is. And so I'll just give one example. When AI was deployed, and this is the research of Joy Bullingh-Winnie, who happens to be a Canadian Ghanaian researcher at MIT, she had created a facial recognition AI-powered system. And when she looked into the camera, AI could not recognize that she was a person, primarily because AI thought, of course, she was a gorilla. But part of this was because when they had trained the AI using the data that they trained it with, they never used any black faces. They never used any brown faces. It was all just white male faces. And so when AI saw something that was different, AI just attributed it to something that was close to something it thought it was. It had not also been trained on the phenotypical features of black faces. And so all of this has created what I call the Swiss cheese effect in the AI mirage, right? It's great, but it has lots of holes in it. And so when we can actually fix the holes, that will help with the increase in trust. But of course, this is a context here where it is government e-services and people just want to get stuff done. I have been to St. Lucia just trying to get my birth certificate. It took hours lining up to get that. I'm like, why is this so complicated? I'm not saying that AI will be the tool that enables that, but we need to ensure that we're meeting citizens' needs, but also safeguarding their privacy. And that is, I think, key to gaining trust with citizens.
Thank you so much, dear Cameron, on that reflection, because again, just using any AI system, when you, for example, ask it to generate images and you said family, I ask all of the participants first to do that exercise, analyze the images by yourselves, and it's going to be pretty much just on the reflection that Ken was making about how AI is being trained on certain types of systems that don't necessarily reflect what the Global South has in mind when we're discussing about our culture and our heritage. So second question, dear Ken, please rank the 3 areas you believe are most critical for making small island developing states smart islands. The first one coming up to mind for participants is cultivating AI and tech literacy among officials and citizens. The second one, building robust digital infrastructure and services. The third, ensuring local data sovereignty and governance. And the fourth, defining clear metrics for AI impact and continuous improvement. I'm surprised because I voted myself and I was thinking always at foundational building robust infrastructure, because that was kind of the discussion. We know we start by the foundation. If you don't have infrastructure, you might still be lacking. But given the audience that we have, cultivating AI and tech literacy seems to be quite critical for our participants. What do you make out of their thoughts, dear Ken?
I honestly thought the building robust digital infrastructures would be number one, but that's fair. The literacy part was something that we talked a lot about at the AI Global South Summit. Even here in Canada, I lecture at the University of Waterloo, and this is also still a challenge, even with certain generations of professors and students. And so, and my students as well. So I remember teaching a course called Information Design in 2022, at the tail end of 2022. And Waterloo is known to be the MIT of the North. And I was shocked that in my classroom of almost 30 students, nobody knew what ChatGPT was. And so if that is the case there at a technical university, I cannot imagine what it is in the Caribbean. But I think before we even go into literacy of AI, we need to have a concrete understanding of what it means in the context of the Caribbean. Right? In one context, it might mean diagnostics. In another context, it might mean ChatGPT and large language models, So literacy really is something that needs to be defined in context of the audience, whether it is for K to 12, university level, the average citizen, the average grandma who may never have an iPhone, right? And so we need to think about of that abstract concept of literacy as something more concrete and what it means to different people in different contexts.
Thank you so much for those reflections, dear Ken. And I'm seeing a lot of discussions going around in the chat. I think we stirred a lot of passion for South-South cooperation and empowerment in the Caribbean and amongst Caribbean countries. So I'm seeing that both the first and the second part of the sessions on our panelists have made a lot of great points to our audience. And before moving on, I just wanted to share with all of the participants, we do have a survey that allows us to have some insights and data, let's say, about the satisfaction overall with the sessions, in this case, of course, specific, the third sessions that we're having today. So I want to know if Karen can share the link. Now we have the link in the chat. Before we have some final remarks from our panelists, we want to ask you to take a couple of minutes and thinking about from 2 to 3 to help us fill the survey. It allows us to provide, I would say, from better content, to have more reflections or more time from Q&A. We have learned a lot from it. Lika is saying in the chat, Karen, that the form is closed. I'm going to click on it just to double check that. And it's true, it's saying that the form is closed, Karen. I don't know if that's a mistake. Maybe it's because we have used that form on previous sessions. Give us 1 second before we get into that, but to not waste any time. I wanted to bring up about South-South cooperation, because building up from what Jack and what Richard was saying in the beginning, seeing the inspiration that comes from the UK, connecting with what you're saying, you can. How can we make this South-South, but also kind of inspired, because the Caribbean has a lot of connections, for example, in this case, to the United Kingdom, historically speaking. How do you envision a world in which we can share more resources? Because one participant was saying this in the chat, it struck with me. We need to build capacities, but building an LLM model or implementing our own AI system, it's going to be really expensive. And most of the times, these are competing priorities in the Global South generally, not just in the Caribbean, but specifically in the Caribbean, you have to decide whether you're financing health or education. And now it comes AI, and you're thinking, okay, now we need to make more investments. I want to start with you, Ken, but then, of course, Richard and Jack, because this is the last part of our conversation. If you want to jump in on your thoughts, how do we kind of figure a way around this paradigm? What comes first, the egg, the chicken? How do we manage to have sovereignty in a world that the US was saying the other day, this is a matter of national security. AI is a matter of national security. That's the way AI is being framed right now in the geopolitical discourse. So amidst all that, how can we see a way through for us in the Caribbean, in Latin America, and also, of course, coming from the perspectives of the UK, the Richard, the Jack, Ken?
I'm going to answer this upside down. So this semester, I'm teaching a course on social media and sovereignty in Canada. And my students and I have had many deep discussions that we think of the atomic bomb being a weapon back in the day. Today, it's AI. And everybody has a weapon in their hand, right? And so we can bring down governments with this. We can bring down organizations with this, right? This is a very powerful tool. And I don't think we've captured in the Caribbean how powerful we are, that we have connectivity and we have the power of AI potentially in our hands. And Enrique, I think the answer to this is, I wrote an essay that politicians will not solve our problems, that designers will, but I will go one further. Somebody thinks on and it's very loud. I'll go one further, and I think NGOs are the solution. Governments come into power and governments go. NGOs are more apolitical.
You got mute there, Ken. Sorry, but you were speaking, but you're on mute. Ken, can you listen to us? Khalid, can you confirm? Because I don't think Ken is listening to us, and I don't think if you're listening to us.
Hi, Ken, can you hear us?
I can hear you now.
You were muted.
Noise?
I don't know. We don't have it. So maybe
Okay.
it's
It's gone.
It's gone? Perfect. Sorry, it must have been the connection. But you were just interrupted at the point when you were pointing out about NGOs. That's the last part that
Yes,
I heard. So you
absolutely.
can continue from there.
Yes. So I think NGOs are really part of the solution, because I think they are organizations that are apolitical in nature for the most part, and they provide this continuity, right? When you have a new government come into power, you may have a government who's very progressive in the use of technology and think, okay, we're going to do AI, or we're going to follow the AI track. And then you might have in the next cycle that government who's highly conservative. It's like, well, we're going to kill that effort. And so we need to think about a continuity of AI development outside of government factions. I think is a way that we can begin to have that conversation.
Thank you so much for that, dear Ken, and sorry for my background noise. The forum is now working, so if you can use the forum to give us your feedback on today's session, we would appreciate it very much. And while you do that, dear Richard and Jack, if you want to reflect on that, debate some disclosure remarks on the participation that Ken has provided.
Yeah, thanks, Enrique. I mean, just to flag that we at Global Government Forum exist to try and make some of the connections that people have been talking about, to share that best practice, to allow governments to steal with pride is a phrase that comes up at a lot of our events, but hear what their peers are doing and get inspired. And I just wanted to share this slide in terms of some of the ways that we can do that. I mentioned this study tour quite a lot in the presentation. We do a series of free in-person events where we get together innovators to have that insight. And I mentioned the Small Island Nations Digital Summit will return to Barbados, so please keep your eyes out for that. We do research looking at sharing these insights from government. Again, I mentioned one of the UK reports. When we do training and webinars, again, where we try and bring public servants together from different countries around the world to share their challenges and best practice in specific policy areas. So I mean, I do think there's a lot of work that can be done collaboratively between officials. I think the point Kim just made about politicians and the political side of government is absolutely a fair one, and different governments come in and have different political priorities, but there's collaborations that can happen between the civil servants, who are always kind of looking to share best practice in our experience, and we are here to help with that endeavor as best we can.
Thank you so much, Richard, and I think you have done that just today between you and Jack, of course, with your presentations. Again, just giving a heads up to everyone that is still joining us. If you want to jump in and use the link for the survey on the quality of today's session, we're always looking forward to have your feedback. And on some final thoughts about it, again, now that we have addressed this South-South cooperation part, I wanted to go to one final point because we still have 5 minutes going until people are still filling out the surveys, and it's about sovereignty, because we just wrote a small paper called G4T Graph for Thought from UNDP discussing the role of data centers. And one of the key points that we were highlighting then was, do we need infrastructure to make the data be, for the data to be protected within the, I would say, geographical barriers of Latin America and the Caribbean? And the answer is, we don't have, again, enough resources maybe to make those investments and have enough data centers to host all of the information that we need in LAC, following the example that Ken was mentioning, about US data being located in the US. But now we have, I would say, legal agreements that allow us to protect the data, even if it's not hosted in a specific place. And I wanted to have a final reflection on the importance of sovereignty, because I think, again, when you are a private citizen, when you're using your phone, you don't pay much more attention to it. But when you're being a public civil servant, you're thinking, hey, this is a concern. We've seen throughout the session today, everybody was pointing out about data protection and sovereignty. So if Richard, Jack, Cam, you want to share some final thoughts about the importance of sovereignty, and how can we, in the Caribbean, specifically in Caribbean SIDS, start to think on how we protect our citizens from that perspective, that would be great. Dear Cam, dear Richard, dear Jack, feel free to jump in.
I'm happy to jump in. So I think we need awareness programs. People just don't know what they don't know, right? And so there needs to be some concerted effort put into socializing that with them. I was at AI Global South Summit again, we were talking about, I think one of the presentations was around WhatsApp. It was around WhatsApp. And what happens with that data? We don't often frame it as WhatsApp is essentially creating a large language model with all of our conversations. That's what it is, right? And so we need that awareness, and we need to figure out who needs to know this and why they need to know this, because when they have all of this data on us without us understanding what they're doing with it, that is itself dangerous in a sense, right? A lot of the current data that these companies have about us puts us in these echo chambers. They put us down rabbit hole. For example, I think about once clicking on green shoes, and these green shoes followed me for weeks and weeks, right? And so, and so it's the same thing in this context as well. So I think we need to think about what are the awareness programs that we roll out to our citizens, and at what granularity to varying audiences to understand the impact and the value of data. Data is now a commodity. We are raw materials, right? And we need to be cognizant of that, and as well as educating our citizens that we and everything that we know has been reified and datafied. So how do we actually have that awareness without being afraid, but being cognizant of the fact that this is power. Data is power for us right now.
Thank you so much
I
for
hope
that
that
question, Richard.
answered.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, I don't think I can provide an answer to your question, Enrique, but just to flag that I think I put it in the chat. We are finding conversations around data sovereignty are gaining much more traction amongst the governments that we talk to. It is a developing and emerging issue, and I think there will need to be actions taken by governments to do that. And I think that that's kind of is being driven by two things. One is geopolitics and the changing international stance of America is leading people to wonder where their data should be, and one is concerns from citizens that Kim just alluded to. I think that all this data is being stored, and you are being followed by the red shoes that you clicked on for weeks. I think there is increasing citizen concern around that, and that is leading to kind of politicians and therefore by extension governments to look into these kind of protections. We're obviously seeing, things like GDPR and things like that being instituted at a European level. I think there's more to be done there, but the international action that's at that level, it will be slow, but it's definitely an issue that's being rising in prominence amongst the governments we speak to.
Thank you so much for that, dear Richard Durkheim, because again, and I agree with you, Durkheim, there was another phrase to say data is power. It was like data is the new gold or the new oil. Because it keeps getting extracted and you can, it becomes a kind of a commodity to the extent of a reflection and a new way of becoming extractive to an extent regarding the Global South. And I want to close our conversation of today, thanking again, Richard, Jack, Kem, because it's been such a, I would say, insightful, but at the same time, inspiring conversation, not only about what is happening now, but about what's to come tomorrow when we're closing down about the sovereignty and importance it's having now for governments all around the world. So again, thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom, for your knowledge, for being with us today. Thank you to CAF, to UNESCO, to IDB, to CARICOM, to CTS, to the Ministry of Digital Transformation of Trinidad and Tobago, that are all part of this initiative to promote a digital transformation that is more equitable, more fair, and also to discuss about AI, and I would say in an open manner that allows us to reflect on how can we, again, use AI as a factor for human development in the Caribbean. And thank you again for all participants, for all that, their insights in the chat, their questions, their knowledge as well. We are very happy to have you all here, and we'll be looking forward to our fourth session that we will be announcing soon enough. Thank you so much for also sharing your thoughts on the feedback survey. There, Karen is pushing one final push for the link, so as much answers as we have, that's the best for us. Thank you so much to everyone again, and we'll be seeing you in our next and final session of the SEEDS 2.0 AI Forum for the Caribbean. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. That was wonderful.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks,
That was
Kim. Thanks, Richard.
really
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you very much.
Thanks all.
We'll follow up. Cheers.
Yes, you'll follow up separately. Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Should move.